A shadow falls over a city. Not just one city, every city. The ships are so large, the clouds part around them. You don't see where they come from, you don't need to. They don't need to say a word. Their size says everything for them. And then, the White House disappears. We remember Will Smith dragging an alien across the Mojave at 9 in the morning. We remember Jeff Goldblum saving the world on a laptop. We remember a president who used to fly jets, climbing back into one. We remember a drunk with a crop duster, who was the town joke, becoming the man who turned the tide. And we remember the speech. Borrowed flight gear, a desert hangar, pilots risking death. And what comes out of his mouth is not strategy, not policy. It is the most successful piece of civic mythology a summer blockbuster has ever put on screen.
Today, we celebrate our Independence Day.
Audiences around the world cheered, not just in America, in Germany, Japan, France, the UK, markets with every reason to be skeptical of American self-congratulation. The film made $817 million worldwide, and most of it came from outside the United States. That is the strange fact underneath everything else. A movie about America saving the world was watched and loved by the world it was supposedly saving. This video is about why. Independence Day is not subtle, it's not graceful. It doesn't survive close inspection of this plot. What it is, underneath the spectacle, the speech, the fireworks, is one of the most efficient myth machines Hollywood has ever built. And its central trick is quieter and stranger than it looks. It turns American power into emotional relief. Not pride, not dominance, relief. So, why does this movie still work? And what does that say about what we want from disaster? The answer matters more now than it did back in 1996, which is strange and worth understanding. This is Independence Day. Most blockbusters from 1996 are remembered as movies. This one is remembered as an experience. The White House explosion is not a scene people cite. It is an image they describe like they were standing outside when it happened. The speech is not dialogue. It's a text that lives in people's mouths 30 years later. Not because they memorized it, but because it installed itself in our brains. Some of it is Will Smith. The studio was afraid casting him would hurt performance in international markets. That fear has a specific ugliness to it, and the numbers buried it. 62.5% of 817 million came from outside America. Smith walked into this film as a sitcom celebrity and walked out as an international movie star. Before franchise cinema turned summer movies into subscription services for people who already know the characters, the event film had a different job. It had to gather people who had not agreed to be gathered, genre fans and civilians, and people who just heard about it, and make them feel like they were witnessing something that could only happen once. Independence Day was the last film to do that at that scale with an original story. Not a sequel, not a franchise entry, just the sky fills and everyone shows up. The film still works because it delivers three things at once: a simple enemy, a clear cause, and an unambiguous cheer. That combination sounds easy, but it's extremely hard to execute. And 30 years later, the film is still finding new audiences. It's not just a 90s relic. It's that feeling it gives you. That total, uncomplicated payoff, which is more and more becoming a lost art in Hollywood. To understand what Independence Day was doing in 1996, we have to start with a specific problem. America had won the Cold War. Berlin Wall fell in 1989, the Soviet Union dissolved in 1991, but by 1996, the settlement had landed culturally. Renowned scholar Francis Fukuyama had described it as the end of history itself. The final ideological competition decided, with one civilization left standing. Sounds like a good problem to have. In material terms, the 1990s were prosperous and expanding. But there was a structural difficulty inside that victory that American culture had not figured out how to solve. If America had won, what was American power for? The story of American exceptionalism depends on opposition. It needs a worthy enemy. The Cold War had provided one for 50 years, an ideological adversary with nuclear weapons, a competing model of civilization, a darkness against which American purpose could define itself. Every American president from Truman organized the moral architecture of American leadership around that confrontation. And then, the adversary disappeared. What replaced it was not clarity but complexity. Ethnic conflicts in places most Americans could not find on a map. The early signals of new threats without obvious centers. Domestic fractures beginning to harden. And beneath all of it, a public that had spent an entire generation growing skeptical of the institutions that claimed to represent it. Things like trust in the federal government was somewhere between only a quarter and a third of the population, a number that had been falling since Vietnam and had not recovered. American power was globally dominant and domestically distrusted at the same moment. Independence Day walks into that problem and solves it. The alien invasion gave post-Cold War American power the one thing it had lost: an enemy simple enough to justify its own myth. Think about what the aliens are not. They are not ideologically motivated. No position to negotiate, no grievance to address, no question of whether intervention is appropriate. They are not nationally specific. Emmerich has said he deliberately avoided making the villains a human enemy because that would have felt nationalistic. By making the enemy aliens, the film strips away the entire problem of geopolitical context. No American history with these creatures. No complicated prior relationship, no question of standing. And they are not morally ambiguous. There is no alien equivalent of a civilian. Nothing in their behavior requires moral attention from the audience. This is the film's first gift. It doesn't ask us to think about power. Instead, it gives us a target with zero baggage. No politics, no both sides, just something we can all agree needs to go. The alien invasion does not just threaten America, it clears the board. It takes the idea of American power, which is usually messy and controversial, and makes it feel heroic again. Independence Day is the fantasy of a world where America is finally right because the enemy is finally simple. The aliens do not just threaten Earth, they simplify it. In one afternoon, they erase every political complexity, every historical grievance, every internal contradiction that makes collective action among human beings so difficult. They are the one thing everyone can oppose without guilt, without ambiguity, without the exhausting negotiation of competing interests. Humanity does not unite in this film because it got wiser. It unites because the enemy is finally large enough to make disagreement feel obscene. When you are looking up at the ship 3 miles wide sitting over your city, you stop arguing about trade policy. The surface fantasy is, America saves the world. The deeper fantasy, the one moving underneath everything else, the one that explains why the film still works in 2026, is that the world can become simple enough to save. That simplification is the gift. The aliens cannot be appeased, converted, or negotiated with. They have no civilian population that might make you pause before cheering their destruction. They have no grievance that partially implicates you. They exist outside any moral framework that would require you to think carefully before wanting them gone. They are perfect opponents. Bill Pullman has said that there were not a lot of movies where the president was the lead character outside of biopics. He had to build the role from scratch, which meant deciding what kind of mythology the film needed to carry. His preparation included listening to Robert F. Kennedy speak after the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr., a man in public authority who was also privately devastated, who had to hold both of those things in the same body and speak from both simultaneously. What Pullman was looking for was not the performance of presidential confidence. Instead, he wanted to sound like a man with nothing left but the truth. The film builds Whitmore before the invasion arrives. He is politically embattled, called a pushover. His approval ratings are soft. His Secretary of Defense questions him. He has served in combat, but that history is buried under the apparatus of governance. The film is constructing a man in a box, capable, already carrying loss, waiting for the moment when the box falls away. When the ships arrive, the political vulnerability vanishes instantly. No one is tracking his approval ratings when the White House is on fire. The press corps evacuates. The election cycle suspends. The entire apparatus of democratic challenge, the thing that made him look weak, is dissolved by a threat that requires no consensus to be real. He becomes fully himself only when the normal conditions of governance no longer apply. This is one of the film's darker moves, though it does not present itself as dark. The ideal president in this story is not the man who can govern complexity. It's the man who can govern after complexity has been removed. When he climbs into the cockpit in borrowed flight gear, personally flying the final mission, the transformation is complete. He's not the president anymore. He is a warrior poet, father of the species, the man who transformed July 4th from a national birthday into a planetary holy day. The invasion does not change Whitmore, it reveals him. There's a single scene in Independence Day that justifies my entire video, and we all know which scene I'm talking about. What makes the scene great is not as a result of great filmmaking. The lighting is flattering, but not really extraordinary. The camera work is fine, nothing special. The scene is not all too visually complicated. That is part of why it works. It justifies the video because of what it accomplishes rhetorically. What it does in 3 minutes at a scale that American political speechwriting has not matched in the 30 years since. Let's first talk about the setup. A desert airfield, a hangar full of pilots who know most of them will not come back. The plan is insane. The odds are bad. The mood is the specific quiet of people deciding whether to go forward or fall apart. Whitmore walks out in flight gear. The visual choice is precise. He's not here as an administrator. He's in the same clothes as the people about to die. By the time he climbs onto that truck, the movie has already done most of the emotional work. The cities have fallen. The chain of command has fractured. The world has been reduced to scattered survivors, broken signals, and one last coordinated attempt. The speech begins quietly. Mankind. A frame that positions everything at the level of the species before the country has been mentioned at all. We will not go quietly into the night. A borrowing from Dylan Thomas, the Welsh poet behind Do Not Go Gentle into That Good Night. One of the most famous poems ever written about refusing to surrender to death. The speech is organized not around information, but around permission. It gives the pilots and the audience permission to feel what they are about to feel. Permission to believe the mission is worth dying for. Permission to experience this moment as historic rather than just desperate. And then it does something no actual president could do. Something that only a movie president in a movie about alien invasion could attempt. Today, we celebrate our Independence Day. That line reportedly helped force the studio to commit to the film's final title, which means the speech's most audacious rhetorical move began as a practical production decision about marketing. The art and the commerce are inseparable. What the line does is rhetorical annexation. It takes July 4th, a specific 18th century colonial revolution against a specific imperial power, with a specific meaning inside a specific national tradition, and redefines it. As of this moment, July 4th does not exclusively belong to American history. It belongs to everyone and everything that occupies this place we call Earth. Every culture that has ever fought for its freedom is now being invited to locate that story inside Americans' origin holiday. This is not subtle. It's not trying to be subtle. The Shakespearean war speech is the obvious comparison. Henry V before the Battle of Agincourt. We few, we happy few, we band of brothers. The grammar is the same. A leader before battle, speaking not to his soldiers' fear, but to their need for meaning. Except here, the scope has expanded from the national to the planetary, and the film commits to that expansion without a wink. It takes one country's origin story and makes it feel like the emotional property of the human species. Not by arguing for this, not by explaining it, but by naming July 4th as everyone's Independence Day and daring you to feel it as truth. Audiences around the world felt it. The film had spent its entire runtime preparing them to accept that dare, and they did. The most famous scene in the movie is not simply a speech about unity. It is the moment the film successfully rebrands America as the center point of humanity. That is the strange power of the speech. It's calculated, it's marketable, It borrows from older literary rhythms. It is engineered to become the moment people quote on their way out of the theater. And somehow, none of that ruins it. So this is where our video turns. Not towards the movie, but towards us. We've been describing how Independence Day turns catastrophe into catharsis. But the harder question is why that bargain still works on us. The plot is thin, the virus logic is absurd, the speech borrows emotional authority it hasn't technically earned, and yet the movie works anyway. Why? Why does the destruction feel thrilling instead of horrifying? Why does the speech raise something in people who can quote it word for word while simultaneously knowing it's corny? The answer is not that we're credulous. The answer is that moral clarity feels like mercy. We live in a world where almost nothing important is simple, where right action requires accounting for competing interests, incomplete information, historical context, and the probability that your own perspective is limited in ways you can't fully see, where even the things you care most about are contested, where your facts are someone else's narrative. Independence Day offers a reprieve. For 2 hours, the complexity goes away. There's one enemy, one cause, one direction to aim. The moral arithmetic is solved before the film begins, so the audience can spend the runtime experiencing the pleasure of action without the burden of justification. That pleasure is real. It's not a character flaw. It's a genuine human desire. The desire to know, for a moment, that you're on the right side, that the thing you are fighting for is worth fighting for. The wish for a world where we can logically distinguish between good and evil, and not having someone else categorize us as being naive. It is grief for the world that actual geopolitics does not provide. The movie is not powerful despite being a fantasy. It's powerful because of what kind of fantasy it is. The feeling of shared purpose. Not the reality of shared purpose, the feeling of it. And the feeling is real even when the cause is fictional. The movie isn't powerful because it fools us. It's powerful because it unites us. So by the time the counterattack launches, the aliens have been constructed with extraordinary care. They have no civilians, no suggestion that inside these enormous ships are beings who did not choose to be there, who are conscripted, who are afraid. They have no history, no chapter of events between Earth and the invasion that might complicate the conflict, no previous contact, no provoked grievance, nothing that might partially implicate human-like behavior. They have no negotiable future. The one attempted communication established that they will not accept anything except total consumption. There is no trajectory that's diplomatic. So when the ships start falling, there's no moral cost, no aftermath requiring examination. It gives us war with the guilt removed. No civilians on the other side, no history, no aftermath, just a clean, almost childish thrill of finally knowing exactly where to aim. This is a specific kind of gift, and it's worth being precise about it. The emotional architecture this film built turns out to be reusable. The blank enemy, the clean violence, the world following America's lead. That grammar does not stay contained in the fiction. It becomes available. Events after 2001 would make that emotional structure feel less innocent. The threat without negotiation. The fantasy of response without guilt. The world asked to follow the American signal. Independence Day did not produce any of that, but it rehearsed the feeling. It made it familiar, it made it pleasurable, years before it was actually required. The film gives us the pleasure of war without the burden of war. That pleasure is real and human, and most audiences feel it without examining it. This is the part worth looking at without flinching. In 2025, 80% of American adults said that Democrat and Republican voters can't agree on basic facts. Not policies, facts. That number is the context in which Independence Day hits differently now. Modern threats are often enormous and genuinely dangerous, and they are also hard to emotionally locate. Climate change is global and existential, and its evidence is overwhelming and has become one of the most politically contested facts in the American information environment. There is no ship over the city. There are metrics, projections, expert consensus, all real, all contestable, none of them producing the unanimous, unreflective gaze upward that the alien ship requires. Polarization does not have an enemy. It is the condition of having competing realities rather than a common one. The challenge of the fantasy today isn't whether or not we could collectively defeat the ship. It's getting everyone to agree that the ship is an actual threat to begin with. That's the deepest form of nostalgia the film produces in 2026. Not for the special effects, not for the 90s movie star energy, not even for the one-liners. For agreement, for a shared gaze, for the experience of everyone looking up at the same thing and knowing together what it means. In 1996, that felt like an amplified version of something real. A world that, despite its complications, still had enough common ground that the film's version of unity felt like heightened reality rather than replacement reality. Today, it feels like something else. Today, it feels like a memory of a world where everyone at least agreed that there's a threat to begin with. And so, 30 years later, the movie still works. The destruction is still thrilling, the speech still does something in the chest, the fireworks over the desert still feel like a release. We know all of it, and it still works. Because the fantasy is not about being fooled. It's about being given, temporarily, the feeling of something genuinely missing. The most comforting thing in Independence Day was never that America could save the world. It was that everyone could agree the world needed saving. One sky, one ship, one signal that everyone reads the same way. One speech that moves everyone in the same direction. The fantasy of shared reality, of a common threat so visible and unambiguous that even the fractured, skeptical, institutionally distrustful world of 1996 could briefly become one room. The aliens do not just invade Earth, they organize it. They give the world one thing human politics had made almost impossible: a reason to stop arguing about what is truth and look in the same direction. This is what the movie was selling in 1996, and it is still selling it now, more quietly, more painfully, with the texture of something that has been lost rather than something that was always just a movie. The alien ship is not the fantasy. The agreement is. Not victory, not American power, not the one-liner or the fighter jet or the borrowed flight gear. The world briefly looking up at the same thing and knowing together what it all means. The Prism is about reading films the way they actually work. Not what they say they are, but what they do, why it works on us, and what that reveals about the world that made them possible. So if you enjoyed this deep dive, please like and subscribe. And until next time, I say to you all, take care of yourself, and let's consider taking better care of each other. See you on the next one.